Welcome everyone to the first ever Oxford-style debate here in Grenoble for the Geopolitics Festival. I am thrilled to be here for this debate and hope that you are too. So why are we doing this Oxford-style debate? You want to know? Inquiring minds want to know. Well, this is wisdom in argument. We're going to have some argument here, and we hope to give you some wisdom for that. This debate will allow you who are here, sitting here, and you who are watching online, to become part of a reasonable discussion. So this is a discussion on a topic where there is no real answer. The debate offers these participants here and the ones online a chance to be informed citizens, as we share ideas and perspectives to help you form or change your opinions. So our debaters here are beautiful debaters who will introduce themselves shortly. They are not experts on politics. They are not expert debaters. But they are educators who have researched for you relative topics to propose you facts and to propose you ideas, and provide alternative viewpoints for you to build your wisdom. So in a world of divided politics, debate is a great way to help us understand the beliefs of others and even accept other people's beliefs. So what is an Oxford-style debate? So this is an Oxford-style debate where in an Oxford-style debate, it's a process in which participants get a chance to argue for and against a topic. That topic is called a motion. So it's a competitive debate where the format features a sharply framed motion. And just so you know, it took us several months to sharply frame this motion. It's proposed by one side and opposed by another side. And it's a discussion grounded in facts and informed by reasoned analysis. The debaters will develop ideas, defend their positions, and argue the positions of their opponents. The winner is the team which has swayed more audience members between a vote before and after the competition. So how will today's debate work? We will present the motion to you as the audience, and each participant will get a chance to vote either for the motion, against the motion, or undecided. Our two teams will then debate the motion with the formal timing and formal flow, which I'll talk about in a minute. At the end of the debate, the audience will again vote for the motion, against the motion, or undecided. And the winner is the team that has swayed more audience members between a vote before and after the competition. So what's the flow and timing? The flow and timing is we're going to start this introduction, this first 10 minutes, and then each of these debaters gets a formal opening statement. A formal opening statement means we will not interrupt them, we will not argue during it. They get a chance to own the floor for 7 minutes. So team 1 gets their first participant for the motion for 7 minutes. Then team 2 gets 7 minutes. The second presenter from team 1 gets 7 minutes, and then 7 minutes. So after that point, you'll have a chance and opportunity to hear both sides of the story. After that, we are opening this discussion to you. Whether you're here online, you're here in person, or you're online, you're going to join the conversation and ask questions. MIELLY is our master question manager. So you're going to see MIELLY, and he's going to help you facilitate the questions. We'll go 15 minutes on the question answer, and then our debaters get 2 minutes each for their closing statements. Their 2 minutes are also not interrupted. They get the floor for 2 minutes to allow you to sway or understand your opinions. At the end, we'll do a final vote, and then the winner will be announced. So, live stream and Twitter. So for those of you who are live and watching on live, please get involved in the conversation and debate via Twitter. We are using the hashtag FDGG-debate. I'll say that again, FDGG-debate. Okay? FDGG is the festival hashtag, and we'll be using FDGG-debate. So ask your questions online, follow the conversation online, And we have our master online facilitator, James Barisic, who's here, who's going to be facilitating that conversation and bringing the offline conversation here for us. So the topic, what is our topic of today? Our topic is related to the theme. The theme of the Geopolitics Festival is about the impact of America in the 21st century. And our debate is more narrowly focused than that. Our debate looks at the impact over time reflected in the Trump phenomenon. Conventional thinking is being questioned, and stark divides are being exposed in social orders. We will provide the audience, you, with ideas, facts, and insights on related topics of things like identity politics, ethics, culture, business stakeholders. So what is Trump reflecting? What is he reflecting? What do you think he's reflecting, you audience members? What is he reflecting? What's the global impact in the 21st century? How long do you think this is going to last? These are some questions for you to ponder. These are some questions that our teams will look at. Our debaters will discuss the concept of impact, which will be defined as an effect or influence. Our debaters will discuss time, relation, temporal issues. Our debaters will discuss what the Trump phenomenon is reflecting. So one thing to note, this is not a debate on if you like Trump or not. Okay? It's not. It's based on the motion. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is our motion. The impact reflected by Trump is here to stay. The impact reflected by Trump is here to stay. So, what do you guys think? Time to vote. Time to vote. So there's two ways to vote. Our preference is, don't show anybody, our preference is for you to go online. Okay, it's for you to go online using this small URL, bit.ly, Oxford pre-vote. So if you can go online, go ahead and do it and make your vote. If not, no need to worry, you've got ballots here, okay? So the team has been giving you pre-vote ballots that will say either for, against, or undecided. Pick one and only one. And when you know which one you want, please give your selected vote, only the one you select, to the people that are here collecting the votes, okay? So now you guys are going to shift from giving to collecting. So make sure that you put the rest of them not voted down and just grab the votes that people have. So select your vote, get it ready. Yeah, our facilitators, can you start collecting? Make sure you collect only the ones that people are voting, not the blank ones, okay? Okay, so while that's happening, I'm going to have our debaters take about 30 seconds to introduce themselves. So we're going to start right here with Prince. So please introduce yourself, 30 seconds.
So, hi everyone, I'm Prince. I'm a researcher here. Everyone says I'm the best researcher.
Yeah.
So I study organizational stakeholders using the relationship between organizational stakeholders and the organizations themselves, using both quantitative and qualitative methods.
Thank you very much. And Carol Margaret.
Hi, I'm Carol Margaret. I'm the head of the American School of Grenoble, and we're really lucky because we have a bunch of our students here today in the audience. And we just had our big presentation day on Tuesday when all the students presented their projects. So now the tables are turned and it's my turn to be a nervous wreck about public speaking. So,
outstanding. Michelle.
All right, thanks. So my name is Michelle MIELLY, and I'm associate professor here. I'm in the People Organization Society department. I'm a researcher and teacher, and also an American and interested in thinking about citizenry today. All right.
And Gazi.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gazi Islam. I'm a professor here at the school, also in the People Organizations and Society department, and I study theory of organizations from a critical management perspective.
Well, we have some pretty talented, amazing people. So did everybody get a chance to vote? You were able to get your votes into the staff? We're still collecting? Still getting some? Okay, it looks like we're just about getting the last votes. We got one right there. Okay, votes are being collected. Fabulous. Thank you so much for participating. How's it going online, James? We're getting voting? Slowly coming in online. Okay, keep it coming, guys, online. Keep it coming. And now it's time to start the debate. Let's give them about 5 more minutes, James. 5 to 10 more minutes online. Absolutely. Let's get that bit.ly URL up there. Oxford pre-vote. Oxford pre-vote. There's that bit.ly. Oxford pre-vote. bit.ly. Okay, ready to go? Let the debate begin. Let the debate begin. Okay, so look at FDGG debate for more information, and the bit.ly, the small URL, will be online. Okay, let's go. It's Prince's turn. Come on up, Prince, and let the debate begin.
Okay, so I'm here to support the motion that the impact reflected by Trump is here to stay. So I know while I'm going to be speaking for the next few minutes, I'm going to be painting a picture that might appear somewhat dark. But I truly believe that unless we come to terms with the permanence of the things we're observing, then we can't really do anything about them. So first of all, I will focus on the things that created Trump. So the impact Trump himself is reflecting, and then I'll try to speak to the impact of Trump's policies towards the end of this debate. So I'll start with a quote by American political philosopher and political science professor Michael Sandel, who says, Donald Trump tapped into a wellspring of anxieties and legitimate grievances to which the mainstream parties offered no compelling answers. So, of course, the question is, what are these anxieties, what are these grievances that led us to where we are? I took a very economic perspective when I tried to answer this question, and one of the things I found is basically a really big issue in the US right now. Wages have stagnated basically since the 1970s till today. So the average American worker basically earns the same today as the average American worker in the 1970s when you control for inflation. So despite the fact that much more people live and work in cities, for example, you still have cities which are, of course, much more expensive than rural areas. You still have these people making as much money as they would have in the 1970s. My generation, millennials, are the first generation that is expected to earn less over our lifetime than the previous generation. So when you have these economic anxieties, these people making not as much money as they would like, it leads to people reacting in very unpredictable ways. The question, of course, is what led us here? Why do we have these? Why do we have this income stagnation? I look at it as the result of this great decoupling. That's what I'm calling it, where you have basically the ROI, the return on investment made by investors, has basically been decoupled from the earnings of the worker. And there are three things that have led us here. There's globalization, there's automation, and there is regulations, changing regulations. There's a Trump quote on globalization I really like. He says, it is our corrupt political establishment that is the greatest power behind the efforts at radical globalization and the disenfranchisement of working people. So, of course, we all know what globalization is. I guess the real issue here is radical globalization, which is less often discussed. It is still a consequence of the globalization that we know. It's just people lose jobs as a result of globalization. Trump himself talks about it. He says the economy is very sick. We are losing our jobs to China, to Japan, to every country. We are making horrible trade deals. We are losing jobs in this country. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs are being lost. But somehow this effect of globalization has been overlooked, and it's something that there's basically no incentive to change, because globalization facilitates the free movement of capital, and there's no incentive to manufacture or to basically produce anything where costs are high when you can do it elsewhere. So this is something that is not going to change on its own. It's something that is here to stay. The second thing is, of course, automation. And by automation, I mean both intellectual and physical, and the automation of physical labor. Jobs that were traditionally considered safe, such as creative industries, are also being attacked by automation. And so basically what you find is it requires much more skill now to be able to get and keep a job than ever before. And this is not going to change. We are not going to turn the tide on automation. And finally, there's regulations. This is a big one, and I feel it's often underlooked. Since the 1940s, you've had what is called rights to work laws in the US. Right to work is one of the greatest political engineering schemes, as far as I'm concerned, ever, because right to work is such a positive sounding name. But essentially what it does is it allows workers to get the benefits of unions without actually paying for these unions. And as a result, you have union membership declining steeply, from about 25% in the 1940s to 10% today. And what happens is, because of the power imbalance, because of the fact that workers are no longer able to negotiate collectively because of these rights to work laws, you have wages stagnating, or in some industries, such as the service industries, actually dropping. So before my time is up, I'll quickly talk about the impact of Trump's policies. Although it's much too early to say what the impacts are, one of Trump's policies that has been in the news lately is his trade policy, basically the trade war he's starting or trying to start. And I'll read a quote from the president of a US trade group, the National Corn Growers Association. And he says, once you lost the market, even a small portion of that market, you might never get that amount back. This quote is the reaction to the fact that Mexican buyers of US corn, Mexico is the top importer of US corn, are now switching to Brazilian corn instead because of the uncertainty of surrounding Trump's negotiation of NAFTA trade deals.
And sorry to interrupt you, but last statement before we go.
So my point with all these cases I've cited is that these impacts, these effects, both the ones Trump reflects and the ones he himself is causing, are here to stay. And I think it's absolutely necessary for us to acknowledge their permanence, for us to find a way forward from here.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Prince. Prince is for the motion, and now against the motion, Michelle, come on up.
Right. Thank you. Okay. So, thank you very much, Prince, for that. And I'm going to look a little bit at the ephemerality of Trump, in fact. So I'm going to look at the question of Trump's impact in a little bit of a different way, from a different angle. So I'd like to suggest there are three main reasons why you should actually vote against the motion. Firstly, because of deep and implicit biases that are leading us to have beliefs about the actual impact that Trump will have and his administration will have. This is a specific phase of our political life that I'm going to examine a little bit further. Secondly, because of the role that emotions have played in this election and in our electoral cycle this time, and led by social media and emotional contagion. And thirdly, the impact of Trump is not here to stay because of recent research that points to the impact and the importance of how social norms can be easily changed and do change and shift very quickly. So There's no denying Trump's rise to power has changed the face of American politics and taught us something about our democracy and the power of the unexpected. So the rise of a real estate tycoon turned television star, reality TV star to the highest office of American politics is indeed was something very surprising, unprecedented, and evoked a lot of emotions on the left and the right. Now, the extreme polarization of the American electorate is something that's followed, but it hasn't come recently. This is not a new problem. What is new and what research tells us through polls and surveys is that simply the degree of divisiveness and actually the intensity of the hatred we have for the other side has definitely increased recently, right? So our opponents, they're arguing that the effects of Donald Trump will be long-lasting in our political landscape. We'd like to examine this perspective a little bit more and the arguments behind them and bring different questions to the table, because there's no really way of knowing what's going to happen in this volatile presidency at this point. We can't really predict anything with certitude, especially the effects. Will they actually be long-lasting? But we'd like to think they're not as long-lasting as you may think today. So first of all, let's think about biases, right? So there's a lot of work on implicit bias, but maybe just to illustrate this, I'll say you can probably all remember a point in your childhood or a point in your adulthood when an event occurred, whether positive or negative, that had a big impact in terms of your perception of its importance. So you thought, oh, your life is either ruined or will be forever altered in a positive way, depending on what happened in a very specific moment. So that is what we call impact bias, which means that we overestimate the power of a specific event or a specific occurrence at a given moment in time, right? So, and that's human, that's our survival instinct, and it's very important. It's also linked to the problem of prediction making under uncertainty, which has been studied in the behavioral sciences, and it shows us that our intuition is informed a lot by our biases. So to compound things, we often look at situations in the present to forecast what will happen in the future, right? So we do overestimate the enduring impact of those emotion-causing events, right? This leads us to hyper-partisan indignation in the current context of the American electoral life. So the question is not, are we biased? The question is, to what extent do our biases impact our emotions, because we are definitely biased here. So that leads me to the second point, is that we've experienced a lot of emotion in this electoral period and following 2015 onwards, and it's even happened here in Europe now. We see the effects happening in the UK and in France. And it's been demonstrated that social media had a huge role to play here, right? And Twitter and Facebook posts were shared by humans and bots alike. And meme farms in distant countries were churning out images and fake news about what was happening in our own election. And people were either liking and sharing them or becoming outraged by them. But we globalized this kind of anger of the disenfranchised or the disdain of a coastal elite that was looking at the opposite. But instead, what happened, instead of engaging in a conversation, we created internal enemies in the United States, and we've created a kind of a civil war conditions, right? So unknowingly, unwittingly, we actually helped Russian hackers sway the elections for Russia. And I'd like to remind everyone that, yes, we were influenced, but we can also counter that. And that leads me to my third point, right? The emotional roller coaster that brought Trump in can also take him right back out in 2020. The idea is that we should struggle and maintain a struggle in a consistent way to not let this be the new normal. I think we can really appreciate the fact that social norms actually change faster than biases, right? If Elizabeth Pollock's work on social norms and the impact of the voice of authority has really looked at very interesting things, whether it be genocide in Rwanda, whether it be bullying in schools. She's looked at a number of situations, Supreme Court decisions, and shown how voices of authority have a lot of power over the way people's will change their social norms. What becomes acceptable? What does the permission structure look like, and how does that change over time, right? Well, this means that norms, unlike biases, emotions, can be used for the common good or the common evil, if we think of Hitler, for example, right? So authority figures across the world use the very tools that brought Trump to power. Well, we can also counter Trump's power with those very tools. So we're against the notion that gives Trump enough legitimacy to have a lasting impact. We are against a motion that acknowledges him for anything other than a colorful comic figure vying for the spotlight, an entertainer who's performing the act of presidency. So lest we make that the norm, we must continually struggle to refocus on what's next. So pragmatically, it's important to acknowledge that yes, we are in a critical period of history, and yes, there is an impact. We are actually in the midst of a major crisis if we look at it this way. Our divided nation is a symptom of that crisis, right? But we must also think about what we can do practically to not let Trump and his politics become the new normal. What actions of the citizenry will enable us to counter his influence and deny him that privilege? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Michelle was arguing against the motion. And now we have our second speaker who's going to be arguing for the motion. Let's welcome Carol Margaret.
My argument, what we're dealing with, is the fact that we can no longer talk with one another. And this is not new. It didn't start with Trump. It's a direction that we've been heading in for a very long time, and it's why I argue it's here to stay. I'll use a 2004 UNESCO interview with Edgar Morin, the French philosopher and sociologist, to structure my argument. I quote, "Dialogue is only possible between individuals who recognize one another as subjects with the same dignity and the same rights. We can only see another individual with the same dignity and the same rights if we see the other person as autonomous. We must understand the rights that are accorded with sovereignty and how government and society uphold these. And to do this, we must have civic education. Civic education in middle and high school used to be a required part of all public school curriculum. Why? Because civic education is about fostering and maintaining democracy. The fact that we no longer require civic education, or that we've reduced it to a multiple choice test, indicates we've overlooked the reality that developing responsible, engaged, and active citizens takes time. It's not about skills and knowledge. Well, it is, but not just skills and knowledge. It's about developing dispositions that lead to action." I quote, "Dialogue is when each person can set out his thesis, produce his arguments, and the other person is not prohibited from doing the same. As civic education has been dismissed, so has debate in schools. Debate is a tool for practicing taking another's point of view and for examining one's own views. It's learning to structure one's ideas through a process that's well-researched, convincing, and respectful. Today in public schools and many universities, debate clubs have almost completely disappeared. Besides the lack of funding, it can be tricky, even risky, for a teacher to tackle difficult issues in the classroom, for fear they may lose their jobs or be confronted with parental backlash. Why is this a problem? From a report from the World Bank Group on Conflict and Violence in the 21st Century, it's reported that there's been a sharp increase in armed conflicts across the globe since 2010. Trump's demeanor and identity politics mean that we treat a point of view as a fixed position. Instead of discussing ideas, we place ourselves into camps of like-identified individuals, closing off opportunities for our views to be challenged, and often resorting to violence. If we don't talk to one another and don't learn how to discuss difficult issues in a respectful, nonviolent manner, then the polarization and divisiveness is here to stay." Again, I quote Edgar Morin, "Mutual understanding is a condition for dialogue. Over the past 50 years, a hierarchy of disciplines has been established in education. We've taken a 21st century attitude that devalues what were commonly referred to as trades or working class professions. In public schools, we used to have classes such as carpentry, shop, home economics, and electrical circuitry. These have completely vanished. We're now even seeing an elimination of the arts in public education. Rotating through the disciplines gave equal value to all these different ways of doing and thinking about things. It developed an appreciation in us for just how difficult certain jobs really are. It instilled in us a common sympathy, empathy, and respect for others who do work that we cannot do. Now, with the disproportionate emphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, setting hardcore academics above soft subjects and trades, our educational system is more stratified and segregated than ever. Why does this matter? It matters because large portions of our population feel undervalued, disrespected, and misunderstood. People who do not see their interests and livelihood protected by their government. Again, from the World Bank Group report, one of the top 4 dimensions attributed to violence and conflict in the 21st century is identity and horizontal inequality. Trump has branded himself as someone who will speak to that experience, making those who have previously felt ignored, undervalued, and overlooked by the establishment finally seen and heard. I continue, I quote Edgar Morin. As soon as the other becomes a wrongdoer or an infidel, dialogue becomes impossible. Each claims to represent good while the other represents evil. Another shift reflected in Trump's politics and persona is the valorization of a type of behavior that has no scruples. Trump has categorized whole populations of people into reductive good versus evil stereotypes with his demeaning and derogatory remarks. We see this theme reflected across countries in Europe and South America in an emboldened movement of extremist politics. It polarizes people into nationalistic mentalities. Take, for example, Mr. Bannon's recent tour of Europe and his rally for a global populist movement. Also, Matteo Salvini, leader of the Italian League's party, is quoted the Gospel of Matthew saying, "The last shall be the first," several times in his appeal to the working class, the disabled, and people who feel neglected. In the US and increasingly across the globe, there's no longer a value placed on diplomacy, and leaders can rule for life. This is reflected in a growing distrust of international institutions and agreements, created by corruption and disillusionment with both governmental and non-governmental groups. Naguère Woods says in her February 2018 article from the Project Syndicate, a country is unlikely to play by the rules if it does not believe that its opponents will do the same. Out with civics, out with debate, well-rounded and interdisciplinary education, and diplomacy. To close, I quote Edgar Morin. Negotiating is bargaining for interests to reach an agreement, whereas genuine dialogue is understanding the other. To understand the other, first, we have to try and know him in his entirety, know his beliefs, his customs, his rights, his civilization. More and more, we live in our own little bubbles. Rapidly changing technologies and globalization means not only are we more mobile, we are becoming more insular, self-centered, and nationalistic. Trump's actions only follow this trend. Look at us. Most of us here are living in a country other than our birthplace. How does this shape our view of citizenship? What is its impact on raising our families? How has it affected our view of those we left behind and our view of the other? How do we explain that we are, as a whole, becoming increasingly xenophobic? In 2014, we hit a world record in the number of forced displacements since World War II, 59.5 million displaced persons. Do we try to understand the culture that we live in, try to understand all its norms and nuances, or do we stand outside looking in? When we are part of a culture and genuinely concerned by it, then we're able to see the differences as a starting point for common ground. The impact of leaders like Trump and its lasting impact will be that we let these differences divide us. We let it close us off to finding solutions to problems that we need to talk about in order to solve together.
Thank you very much. Okay, that was Carol Margaret. She is for the motion. And our last speaker against the motion is Gazi. Come on, Gazi.
In 1999, in his book, The Bridge Over the Racial Divide, William Julius Wilson wrote that economic insecurity creates conditions that hollow out the civic values of liberal democracy and constitute the breeding grounds for racial and ethnic tensions. He states, quote, "In this social climate, some conservatives in the United States have attempted to unite white Americans around anger at the government and racial minorities." That was 20 years ago. But it is not the first time that the smoke of ethno-nationalist fantasy has hidden the smoldering flame of economic insecurity. It has happened before, and 20 years on, it's still happening. At this historical moment, how should we confront the impact that Trump has made on the fragile balance between liberal democracy and market capitalism? In my argument, I will make 4 brief points. First, we must not make Trump the new normal. To see the impact of Trump as definitive and permanent means to ignore how it grew out of and provides a caricature of late capitalism. Trump is neither new nor normal. He is not new because he is the spectacular version of narcissistic greed he represents, and it's a well-known stereotype. He's not normal because the figure he represents is not the everyman of the street he pretends to represent. Americans do not think like Trump. They do not act like Trump. Trump does not stand for America or American values. at least not yet. Second, Trump is a superficial symptom of a more deeply rooted social crisis. The US has been living through a social crisis that is multidimensional in nature, involving economic, cultural, and political aspects. In the economic sphere, this crisis is marked by stagnating wages since the mid-1970s and unprecedented growth in the top 1%, who now earn roughly a quarter of national income. It is also marked by the decline of the social safety net and the welfare state, the erosion of public goods such as schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, declining public services, and diminishing worker rights and protections. It looks like we're kind of on the same page on this at this point. In the political sphere, the increasing privatization of public goods has made public services less representative of citizen needs and more beholden to stockholder demands, while a hollowed-out public sector has reduced the government's ability to secure public well-being, compromising the public legitimacy of government and making it a prime target for accumulated frustration. Finally, in the sphere of civil society, social movements during and after the civil rights era pointed out the lack of inclusion of women and minorities in the national conversation. American culture was revealed to be a mosaic of multicultural identities rather than a homogeneous culture. What could have been an opening to a deeper democracy through pluralism in the light of the political and economic crisis described above was instead turned into a source of fragmentation and division. These crises are interrelated, and each one represents a side of a social totality. However, the conversation has largely marginalized voices promoting economic justice and is focused on political, but especially cultural, concerns as a substitute. The taboo of uttering the word socialism made sure that this economic justice narrative went unheard. In this empty space, an ethno-nationalistic myth has come in to fill the void. Third, Trump's identity and sovereignty discourses deflect attention from the socioeconomic roots of the situation. The struggle against economic injustice has been distorted into a crisis of national unity and ethno-national identity. It is not the poorest that voted for Trump. The poor voted Democrat, and the median income of Trump's most ardent support was, as John Bellamy Foster notes, over $70,000 a year. But the less educated did significantly vote for Trump, suggesting that it is not poverty per se, but middle-class fears of backsliding into poverty, combined with a lack of information about the true causes of that danger that led to ethno-nationalist support. As a result, the danger of losing the American way of life has not been seen in its true light as a consequence of growing economic inequality in a post-industrial society. This inequality has led citizens to view their neighbors as competitors in a zero-sum game. Exacerbating this sense has been a policy regime that insists on taking the low road of cutting expenditures rather than the high road of investing in human capital, sustainable development, and social stability. Liberal democracy becomes increasingly unable to defend itself, and people seek authoritarian alternatives. Apologists increasingly deflect the core of the problem onto ideological battles that colonize the media and the blogosphere. Social tensions and stemming from public budget cuts are misleadingly attributed to so-called culture wars and diminishing patriotism. Inefficiencies from overstretched agencies, budgetary suffocation, and privatization are cynically blamed on government overreach and red tape. In each of these displacements, economic causes are occluded and replaced by artificial sweeteners such as race, nation, or most ambiguously, the people. The latter term is effective only because of its lack of meaning, and for that reason, we should not consider Trump a populist. To speak for the people means to care about their needs and their livelihood. Trump's false appeal was only possible because his predecessors did not take these needs and livelihoods seriously enough. Fourth, Trump is a Republican, but the underlying crisis is bipartisan. The legitimacy crisis facing the US was not caused only by Republicans, but by the neoliberal capture of both parties. This is not a story of the failure of the center to hold out against far-right extremists. It is the story of a center that has not stayed true to its own values and its narrative of social justice, and has been dragged so far off-center that it is itself increasingly indistinguishable from those on the right that it critiques. In conclusion, the Trump presidency is a symptom of a system crisis that has been building for many years, and is a continuation, not a rupture, of that system. Trump is an ulcer in the upset stomach of American capitalism, a condition that will pass with the right treatment and care. But when America is tired and overworked and its social fabric is sapped, the ulcer returns and worsens and eventually becomes deadly. Democratic values continue to live as long as we continue to speak. However, until we address the economic and social injustices that strain our social fabric, this affliction will return in ever worsening forms. This injustice is not normal, it is not permanent. Let us do what we can each day to remember the world that will come after it is past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gazi was speaking against the motion. And now it's time for you, the audience, to participate and help us get this argument, this debate going. So Michele has a microphone. And please, we can have questions on this side. Please stand up and address with Michele on that side. You've got your microphone. We do need to speak into the microphone because this is being translated and recording. We also can have questions on this side. So who would like to be the brave one to ask the first question?
Yes, great.
Shishir.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks a lot for having this debate here. My question, I tend to be on the against the motion side, so I would like to address this as a common question and say, if something needs to be done to take this this aspect of feeling that is inside the people's mind in and outside of America, what do you think is the first thing that needs to be done as collectively as people and also from the administration side? But I feel both the motions are in agreement of the fact that this is not right, but it's going to stay or not going to stay is the question here. So now that the whole notion itself, the existence of it itself is under question, what do you think can be done to either try and remove this notion or try and see the implication of the notion does not take a negative structure?
Let's start with the team, maybe against the motion. Yeah?
So thank you for the question. I think it's very interesting what you're saying because I think we agree, both teams agree on the structural issues at the foundations and the origins of this rise of a populist neo-fascist movement. At the same time, I think that what we're looking at is, as you asked, interestingly, what are the next steps? One of the things we can do and we have to do is number one is to do everything we can to not normalize it and to use the voice of authority figures in different communities. So the only way to counter Trump is to use the same tools he used to come to power, i.e. his very, I think, interesting use of Twitter, for example, or, I mean, we can say what we want, but it's effective. The way that Facebook was used to raise money for his campaign was different than what had been done in the past. So we're, with social media on steroids, we have to find a way to harness that, right? And I think we have to also take into account the need to have conversations across the aisle. I think right now the hate and divisiveness is unprecedented, and I think that's important. So we're going to have to do a few things, which is the voice of authority figures who can then condemn the behaviors, because we're paying attention to those people, and that's what research tells us. That will push the social norms to not accept this, and it can really be a tipping point for American citizens who are against Trump, just like people who were for him have been influenced. Maybe you have something to say.
And the against, the four team, sorry, for the motion.
Okay, so I believe you cannot address a problem until you diagnose and you accept that there's a problem. I believe the first step to treating this problem is acknowledging that there is a problem and that this problem is permanent. This problem is here to stay. Trump won almost half of the popular votes. Trump reflects something that is real. That thing exists. And as long as we treat it like something that's going to go away, then we are not treating the actual problem. So I think the first step is to acknowledge that these problems are there, these things that created Trump are there, these things are permanent, and then once we acknowledge this, then we figure out how to live with them.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I could ask. So I think here we see a lot of the common ground, right? So I think part of the difference is whether we see Trump as an accurate reflection of that underlying problem or as a distorted mirror image of that problem. So although we might agree that there is a legitimate protest that must find some kind of voice in the public sphere, the question is there any other channel by which that voice could be made that would not be the Trump channel? Whether those legitimate concerns can be made via a more productive channel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say much that contradicts it. I mean, I agree it's a much more systemic, long-term problems that we actually have to acknowledge and unpack. And until we really do them in an honest, authentic way, instead of, I mean, yes, using social media, and this is a product of our times, but I would argue that until we really take a good hard look at the direction we've been heading in for a long time, and maybe not resort to Trump tactics, that we maybe look more locally at the conversations we can have in our own community, look for the leaders who are close to home, and have conversations with people who differ on real conversations where we're really listening and trying to understand that point of view instead of prove how wrong that point of view is. Until we start to have that conversation in a very real way, then we're going to keep heading in the same direction.
Okay, thank you so much. So I just want to remind everyone that whether you're here in the room or you're online, please use the hashtag FDGGdebate to feel free to ask your questions. So whether your questions are here now or online, we can address them now, and also we can continue to have the conversation afterwards. So questions online and in person. More questions, please.
Hi, great job so far, guys. I'm really enjoying this. My question is, how are you guys specifically defining in like the smallest soundbite possible the impact reflected by Trump? Because I've seen some of the definitions has been more the change in the way that politicians are actually engaging with potential voters. Also, the fact that we now have someone who is a reality TV star as president, and then also to the other end of, hey, this is a reflection of dissidents in the voting population. So where we're arguing kind of different or debating different definitions of that, I'd like to see kind of like how you guys soundbite define what the actual impact is at its root.
Let's start with a team for the motion.
So we've taken a really broad perspective of the motion, and we define the motion as both the causes and the effects of Trump. So we've tried to emphasize both the economic, the macroeconomic, as well as the social causes and effects of Trump.
And against the motion.
So I think our definition is actually a bit narrow. When we say Trump, we mean Trump. And that's why we're arguing that the enduring social issue that keeps going here is the social crisis that's underlying, that will not go away. But Trump also has his specific idiosyncratic effects, which are not negligible. But we're saying that those are symptomatic and those are superficial. So while we treat those will go away. But it's that underlying cause which is with us to stay.
But I would also add that, like all U.S. presidents, they leave behind a legacy. And so the undoing of major, international agreements, these are not going to be easily repaired, for example.
I don't know. It's very interesting. There's been a lot of talk about bipartisan, the problem of bipartisan collaboration under this administration. So there are some real immediate problems in terms of government. But we also see that a lot of times there is a system of checks and balances that will, I think, keep under control a certain number of the agreements that he's trying to undo. I think it's what I'm saying and what we're trying to argue here is that the impact of Trump right now is very much an emotional subject. It's a subject that is swaying us in certain directions, And it's a dizzying problem because he's very unpredictable and he doesn't really seem to know where he stands on questions such as gun control. And a lot of the things, the policy decisions he's made are symbolic. If you think about like naming Jerusalem the capital, or a visit to North Korea, these are puzzling, and even for his own foreign policy core members, right? So this is diplomacy is bewildered by Trump. So I think that, yes, we can't underestimate the problems that he's creating in the immediate term, but I think in the long term, the American government has a system of checks and balances that can contain some of those decisions. So I think what's really the problem now is it's very fleeting, ephemeral in the psychology of the electorate. And I think that's really what I wanted us to focus on, is the problem of this emotion that is contagious in our society and that has led us to over-perceiving the importance and the impact that he actually can have.
Okay, we've got a question over here.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm 22 years old, and the first thing I remember about George Bush was when he had trouble finding his word in his famous "Fool Me Once" speech. I don't know if you can remember that one. So same things happened with Obama when he missaid words, etc. While we can see that with Trump, anything that he says, anything that he and in any way he acts, is getting ridiculed, but for such little time, and people seem to lose the care that they have about politicians. So my question is that, do you think that the impact on that Trump has on politics and on the image of politician is going to last or not? Do you think that Trump has reduced what we await from politicians?
Yeah, let's start with the against team.
I could say a quick word, on this. So I think part of that explanation, maybe not all of it, has to do with the differing nature of the media. So that we're in a situation now, you might call the attention economy, where something that's clicked on is revenue, whether or not people like it. And so in some sense, you can profit from saying things that are scandalous or are attention grabbing, regardless of the underlying logic of that. And I think that's something that's increased in those periods. And so I don't think that's just an issue of Trump, right? I think if you look at the popular media, I think we can see that in a lot of cases where things that are not so intelligent become very lucrative, in fact, because of their stupidity and not despite it. And so I wouldn't put that as only a Trump effect, but I do think it affects politics. And that might actually be one of the underlying causes, which is more important than Trump himself, is that dissolution of language that we're seeing.
Prince?
Okay, so I would also add that one of the reasons why you have this, like Gazi talked about, is this 24-hour news cycle, the internet, quick access to information, and stuff like this are not going away. I mean, we are not going to reverse the internet age. We are not going to shut down the internet. But the internet, unfortunately, creates this economy, like he said, where attention is basically money. And to get your attention, the news outlets basically have to keep churn out this cycle of scandals, basically. So essentially what you have now is a system where for you to be a successful politician, which has always been the case, you have to be in the news. And unfortunately, the way to get in the news today is to perpetuate this cycle of scandals. And so, yes, I do think this is the new normal. And unfortunately, I don't see it going away in the near term.
Okay, anything else from the pro or against team?
I just thought it was interesting, the question about the type of language, what we're noticing, right? So there is something definitely about the kind of the ADHD attitude that we're getting from the use of social media and clicks. But I also think it's interesting that we are paying less attention. Trump has been able to get away with a lot more than other politicians in the way that he's had a lot of, his lack of eloquence, for example. So I think this is really also reflective of a general desire to have someone who makes faux pas and who is actually very awkward, because I think, frankly, the people who feel disenfranchised in the United States are tired of having their manners and the way they're supposed to speak dictated to them. And that's a problem that we all have to think about, and that's the problem of political correctness.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so this is the end of the formal question and answer session, but again, we do have the ability to ask your questions online. going to the Twitter, which is FDGG Debate. So please do continue to ask questions. We have James who's going to be monitoring that Twitter conversation so that we can continue this conversation after. At this point now, though, it's time to allow our debaters to give us some closing comments. They've been able to start, they've been able to hear the other side, they've been able to hear your questions, and now it's time for them to succinctly, within 2 minutes, and I'm going to try to cut people off if they go over, try to help make their final point to sway your vote for or against. So we're going to start off with Prince.
Okay, so quickly, this debate, although we talk about Trump, this is not really about Trump. I mean, American institutions are some of the strongest in the world, American democratic institutions, and Max 2024, Trump is out. This is really about what Trump reflects. I've pointed to 3 big macroeconomic trends that have created Trump: globalization, regulations, and automation. These 3 things are irreversible. These 3 things are not going away. I want you to think about that when you cast your vote again. And then I want to quickly talk about what Trump himself is creating. I mentioned trade deals. And the thing is, once you step away from trade happens regardless of whether one party is interested or not. There are always other people willing to step in to take part in trade. Trade is good. Everybody wants to trade. So when America steps away from trade, when America steps away from NAFTA, when America steps away from TPP, other countries step in to replace them. I talked about Brazil, and Brazil is basically selling 10 times more corn to Mexico than ever before. And this is because Mexican buyers are looking for a replacement to America because of the uncertainty Trump has created around NAFTA. This is not going to change whether America comes back to the table or not, because once supply chain systems have been established, these systems are very difficult to break. So again, I want you to think about that when you cast your votes. It's important for us to address these issues and understand that they are permanent, and then we can figure out how to live with them.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Michelle, 2 minutes.
All
Brief
right.
closing comments.
Okay, so I agree. I think that there's no problem in acknowledging the macroeconomic and structural constraints that are going to be imposed by a regime which seems to be inward-facing and highly protectionist. And I think that if you look at the history of trade in the WTO, there's always been a lot of things that have angered people there. The Americans have done. I think we have some of the best, toughest negotiators who do look at it as a zero-sum game. However, I think that those are still missing the real point. I think the real point here is, how are we perceiving of this impact, and how is it going to change the way we work in our democracy as citizens, as voters, as people who can think? And I think it's very important for us to maintain the power to think. And everything is out there to stop us from thinking really independently. And I think that's something that we all need to ponder, and it's something that Hannah Arendt really looked at very carefully when she talked about the banality of evil, and when she examined the Eichmann trials and the normalization of not thinking, of executing. And I think this is very important for us at every level, is to think, if we start thinking that this is something that will continue, and it's let's say, a cycle of something that we are unavoidably going into, a new cycle of, let's say, populism or conservatism, I think then we're fatalistically missing the point, which is we have a role. And by not engaging in hate debates with each other on the internet, and by looking at movements such as our betterangels.org, I encourage you to look at different initiatives that are taking place. There are things we can do that are very practical in our political life, in our activity, in the way that we work with leaders and look to leaders and become leaders in our communities. And so I think that it's very important to think about the 3 things I mentioned, which are the role of bias, the role of emotion, and the necessity to shift social norms using the same tools that Trump has used to get where he is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And now Carol Margaret for the motion.
So I think we're in a lot in agreement about some of the issues we're facing altogether. And I hate to end on a very dark note, but I think, again, I quote Edgar Morin, real dialogue is when you recognize the same dignity in the other. And no dialogue is really possible between a master and a slave. Dialogue assumes equality. 500,000 people are killed by interpersonal violence each year. That's 1,300 people per day. We need diplomats. Where are they? Where is our dignity and our equality? The most recent example with Trump firing is U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson because they disagree. How did he choose to break the news to Tillerson? Did he sit him down in his office and talk to him? No. Of course, he announced it on Twitter. Many of the ambassadorial positions in the U.S. State Department are left vacant. Trump's goal is to cut the department still by 31% and to reduce the number of foreign service posts by 3%. Nicholas Burns at NPR was interviewed on NPR. He's a former ambassador, U.S. ambassador and ambassador to NATO, and he said Trump doesn't believe in talking. I think this represents worldwide our politics, our choices about education, our choices about how we treat one another. And we don't take the time to really foster dialogue. We don't value the craft of beautiful, passionate speeches that are created to persuade our brothers and sisters to follow a common dream. We're not sitting down together to talk about these difficult issues and how we disagree. Where are we? We're on our devices, sticking to those who make us feel comfortable and who agree with our own way of thinking. We tweet, we post, we brand each other, we brand ourselves. We build walls, big walls. And we do not see the other reflected in ourselves. Until a balance of tolerance, true tolerance through dialogue, and the respect of other people's positions, no matter their viewpoint, until that's established, the impact reflected by Trump will be, as we're seeing, a breakdown in talking and an increase in bullying, censoring, and division among us.
Thank you very much. And that was for the motion. And for our last closing statement against the motion, we've got Gazi. Take it away.
So thank you again for your patience. I want to again note that there is a lot of common ground between the two sides, but I do think that there's one point in which there's a fundamental difference. And this starts in the first speech of the FOR group when they said that we have to recognize the situation as permanent in order to act. But I think we would hold exactly the opposite. In order to be able to change the world and to change this current situation, we have to be able to see the situation as malleable, as something that can be changed, as not permanent, but as dangerous. So that's the first point. So there is a clear difference there, and we have to realize that the situation did change quickly, it changed surprisingly, and it can change again. History is not over yet. Adding to that, the whole idea of the blogosphere brings up a very important point. And that point is that by giving all of this attention, all of this superhuman mythological power to this figure of Trump, by talking about nothing but Trump, by using the word Trump in every other news story and email and tweet, we actually empower Trump. And the problem with that is because the social reality is created through those symbolic means. By treating Trump as permanent, we make him permanent. We create the monsters that we fear. In the same way as the school bully wants you to think that his impact will last, but it won't. When we stand up, when we act, we can change the situation. It's a situation that has not lasted very long in its current form. That said, the underlying danger that keeps reproducing that situation is something that happens again and again and again. We thought when Bush was elected, all we have to do is get rid of Bush, and then everyone was so happy when, well, not everyone, but some people were so happy when Obama was elected, and we went back to business as usual. The point of the against team is simply not to go back to business as usual. When we get rid of Trump, which we will, we have to change the underlying social dynamic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. Outstanding. Okay, so here we go. We had opening statements from the for team and the against team. We had question and answer. And now we had some closing statements. And now it's for you to make a final vote. Okay? So our teams will be going around. You may need some more ballots, right? Because you already handed one in. But make sure, are there extra ballots back there that you can hand out for folks? Extra ballots to hand out? Does anybody need more ballots? Okay, you guys need more ballots. Let's make sure these guys get some ballots. And what we're going to do now is we're going to let you collect the ballots. You're going to have to help them hand out some ballots. And also, for those of you that are voting online, if you're voting online, please go to this bit.ly and look for Oxford Post. Oxford Post. Okay, Oxford Post. And that's where you'll be going and making your vote. It looks like we need some ballots. Do we have ballots that can come around so that people can choose the right ones? Are there any more ballots back there? Okay, we're going to take a few minutes to get some ballots going. So while that's happening, make sure to get your ballots in to those that are collecting. We have some extra ballots here if you need them. Okay, Michele is collecting. Can you help collect? Can you help collect, Lisa Jane? Anybody can help collect? Collect some ballots. Make sure to get them to our ballot collectors. Okay, so while that's happening, anybody else need ballots? Anybody else need ballots? Okay, we need one down here too. We need one down here. Okay? Okay, great. So while that's happening, how did you guys like the debate? Was that your first Oxford debate? Yeah? Yeah. Thank you very much. So it may be for some of you your first debate. This was your chance to participate. This was your chance to listen to informed discussion. While we're collecting votes, what I also want to do is I want to thank some of the people who were part of this debate. First of all, to thank you as the participants. Thank you very much for coming and joining. Yeah. Thanks for being part of it, for listening carefully to being part of the debate. I'd like to thank the people that are online watching us via video. I'd also like to thank some of the people who helped facilitate this debate for you. So we have Michele Coletti there, who is the question guy in collecting votes. There's Michele right there, right? We've got James Barasic, who's right here. He's been the one that's been helping us with the online. Lisa Jane Perot, right here, who's been helping us with the timing. She's had a countdown clock going so that we can kind of try to keep on schedule. I'm Sharon CROST. I've been your facilitator for today. My role, thank you, my role was going through about 27 different motions so we could finally come up with one that was the one that you could actually think about. Okay? So we've had a lot of people working on this. And most importantly, I would like to thank our 4 debaters right here. Big round of applause for our 4 debaters. They had some pretty darn amazing things to talk about. They did an outstanding job of putting together their statements, putting together their opening statements, trying to keep within a time frame, using their best public speaking, using their best listening, using their best ability to think through and debate issues. So they did a fabulous job, and thanks again for being part of this. Okay? So we hope this was the first ever debate, but we do hope to continue doing this. So how are we doing on collecting votes? We need a joke, Michele? Yes. We need a joke. That's your role, remember? Anybody have some comments or questions they would like to share with us while we're waiting for the votes? What you thought about the debate?
Sorry, maybe it comes too late, but anyway, most people have voted. I was a bit surprised because I didn't hear the word Democrats. So I wonder whether there is an alternative, a credible alternative to Trump.
Yeah, no, I think we did hear Democrats, Republicans. I think we did hear some of this. What was really interesting is how each of the debaters took a bit of a different view on things, right? They took an interesting view. Again, the Oxford-style debate is designed to help sway your opinion, to help you kind of think about listening attentively to both sides of a story. Okay? So it looks like we're just about, not even just about, getting to get. Born in the USA. Okay, that's enough. Okay, so just waiting for the final vote. I'm sorry? 6:25. We've got 5 minutes. We got 5 minutes before we're ending, and the suspense is building. Suspense is building. James is using his best under pressure calculation to determine the winner. So let me remind you how this works. So how it works is that before the debate, each of you are asked to vote for the motion, against the motion, or undecided. And what we do is we calculate a percentage. So we'll come up with which percentage voted for, against, and undecided. Okay, and I know what those are, I got to see. And now what we're doing here is we're calculating the percentage of people that votes for, against, or undecided. And the winner is going to be the team that swayed the most votes, okay? So for example, if it was 33, 33, 33, the team that went from that to something higher than that is going to be the winner. So that's what we're waiting for just now, is a calculation of the percentages. No pressure. No pressure. While we're waiting, any other comments? Any other things that people want to talk about?
May I ask, because we have friends from University of Kentucky here, and they've been, I'm very glad that they found the time to come, and I would like to have their opinion on this debate, where it's close to reality or is a bit too much of an helicopter view. What is your feeling?
And MIELLY, though, they will have to talk into the microphone.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, but they have to talk into the microphone.
Maybe they can answer. I don't know whether.
So coming from the U.S., and I did not vote for Trump. I voted against Trump. I'm not really a huge fan. It was interesting. I think someone commented on Twitter that it seemed like all four of you were against Trump and didn't really agree with the policies, and how different the debate would have been had you guys all been very pro-Trump, which I thought was an interesting comment that came through the Twitter feed. Overall, it sounded like I voted. Can I say how I voted? I voted for the motion. I thought that was the argument that won. And I felt that a lot of the arguments that you guys made on the against the motion side actually supported the for the motion. That's what we were kind of talking about. But it was really interesting in general just to hear, because I was the one that asked the question about the impact and how you defined that. And it was just interesting, like how wide of a definition that was, and how you guys each individually like drilled down into how you defined the impact for your part of the argument. But overall, it was really interesting, and we were all just talking about how I think we all voted for the motion. So, but it was really interesting and really good.
Okay, thank you very much. And now it's the final moment. Drum roll, please. Drum roll, please. There we go. Drum roll, please. Okay. So before this debate started, we had 40% of you who were undecided about this motion. 40% of you undecided. 40. And that meant we also had equal 30% for and 30% against the motion. Unbelievable to start out with, okay? But the interesting thing, congratulations to all of you, because the interesting thing is after the vote, only 10% of you were undecided. So this debate, we all win, because this debate meant that you thought of things in a new way, and you got a chance to change or think about things differently. That said, that means that we've got some to move, and I would like to announce that the team for the motion, that was 30%, moved up to 37%, which means the team against the motion went from 30% to 53%. And I'd like to announce our winners, the team against the motion. Stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. Please, thank you very much. Okay, thank you everybody for participating. Again, we'll continue the conversation online in the Twitter feed. It was a pleasure to do this, and we hope to do it again. Thanks, everyone.